Against the grim backdrop of global terrorism and a deadly health crisis, world leaders are convening in New York this week for their annual gathering at the United Nations General Assembly. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Besheer reports.
Violence in Iraq and Syria, which has become a breeding ground for extremist groups, most notably the Islamic State, will be addressed by the international community, says UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
I welcome the growing international consensus to act against this serious threat to global and regional peace and security.
A centerpiece of that effort will be a UN Security Council meeting chaired by President Barack Obama on the rise of foreign terrorist fighters. New York University professor Richard Gowan says the meeting sends an important political message.
President Obama has put together a coalition of 40 countries to fight ISIS. And at the UN, he will be reaffirming that struggle. Actually, most of the hard work has been done already, but the UN is a good stage to talk about the need to fight the Islamists.
Also high on the international agenda will be containing the recent outbreak of the Ebola virus, which has killed nearly half of the about 5,000 people infected with it in West Africa.
This is not just a health crisis. It has grave humanitarian, economic, and social consequences that could spread far beyond and affected countries.
U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power says the annual meeting is meant to bring leaders together to address global challenges.
Both of these threats, I think, illustrate the founding purpose of the United Nations and the purpose of bringing the heads of state of the United Nations together every season, which is how do we pool our resources to cooperate not only to deal with common threats, but to deal with threats that we simply no single nation can deal with alone.
Crises in Africa, the conflict in Ukraine, and the aftermath of the 50-day-long war in the Gaza Strip are other issues that will be discussed by the leaders. The Secretary General is also convening a summit on climate change to urge countries to make commitments to cut greenhouse gas emissions. NYU's Richard Gowan says the past year has been an especially difficult one for the international community.
This has been a really painful year in UN diplomacy, with fights over Syria, fights over Ukraine. The challenge from ISIS and the challenge from Ebola are two things that all governments can agree on, and there will be a big push to try and restore some unity at the UN after a very, very divisive year.
Some of that diplomacy will be conducted in the newly renovated General Assembly Hall, the final part of a nearly 6-year-long, $2.2 billion UN campus renovation that has made the nearly 70-year-old complex safer and more energy efficient.
Well, for more on the top issues facing world leaders of the UNGA, VOA's Margaret Besheer joins us live from the United Nations. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, Vincent.
Yes, now first give us the reaction to the U.S. strike against ISIS in Syria. What are you hearing?
Well, just a few minutes ago, the Secretary General was speaking to reporters, and he made some remarks. He basically gave his blessing to this airstrike, is what it sounded like. He said that as long as people in Syria were living under the threat of extremists, and as long as the government was committing human rights abuses against the people had to be protected. So it sounded like he was giving his blessing. He noted that the strikes were done in a part of Syria, in an area where the government does not have control over the territory anymore. So perhaps kind of waiving the issue of whether the government needed to give its consent. And he also pointed out that the United States did alert the Syrian government through the ambassador here at the UN, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that Ambassador Power, the U.S. ambassador, gave the message to her Syrian counterpart, Ambassador Jafari, that the U.S. had some intentions in this direction.
Yeah, but this is just the beginning. The U.S. is still going to ask the UN members to give more support, and kind of the Secretary General of the UN is going to take the lead on this too, isn't it?
No. Well, on Wednesday, tomorrow, President Barack Obama will be here at the UN, and he's going to have a meeting in the afternoon in the UN Security Council on the issue of foreign terrorist fighters and on the issue of keeping them out of their countries. You know, if you go to Syria and become a fighter, we don't want you to come back to Somalia or to France or the United States or wherever you came from. So there's going to be a meeting here to kind of galvanize international support, but that's a U.S.-led effort here. And it's important to point out that the countries that were are helping the United States with these airstrikes that took a very prominent role are our Arab partners, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. So this has been very much an Arab-led effort too. And don't forget, I mean, Islamic State is on their doorstep. So it's they're stepping up from the region to help counter this threat.
Very significant. But Ebola is the other big issue at the UN, as you mentioned. How is it going to be addressed at this General Assembly?
Well, cases going up every day. Already our story is a little bit out of date. We said almost 5,000 cases. Now it's up almost to 6,000 cases. The Secretary General is convening a high-level meeting on Thursday morning with world leaders on the crisis. The President of Guinea, Mr. Conde, I believe. I'm sorry, I'm not sure of his first name. He'll be here, but the presidents of Sierra Leone and Liberia will be joining by teleconference. I believe they're staying home because the crisis is, so serious in their countries. The UN already has an advanced team on the ground in the region for their new UN Ebola mission, the special mission that they've set up to do logistics and coordinate aid efforts. And the US has boots on the ground helping build these Ebola treatment units, which are so important to containing the virus and helping people survive, because they can survive, but the issue is there are just not enough beds in these treatment facilities to help people, and people are going home and infecting their families. So that's one thing. And the CDC is saying that they need to get some efforts going to help the caretakers, the family people. They're going to try and get some protective gear to them and things like that, so that they will be able to take care of people in their homes without themselves being at risk.
Well,
so many efforts on all fronts on Ebola.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, Margaret, thank you very much for your excellent reporting there. Margaret Besheer. That's Margaret Besheer of Voice of America reporting live from the United Nations.